I found 3 nails in the wall when I moved in, evenly spaced, like someone had planned to hang something long. The landlord said the previous tenant left in a hurry. He said it with a smile, the kind men use when they want you to stop asking questions. I was 34, recently divorced, and the rent was low enough that I convinced myself none of that mattered. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in a city I barely knew, and the windows faced a courtyard where nothing grew. I hung my coat on the first nail, a mirror on the second, and left the third empty. That was my first mistake, though I didn't know it then. The sound started on the third night. Not loud sounds. That's what I want to make clear. Because when people say they heard something in a new place, you imagine banging pipes or wind through bad insulation. This was different. It was a sound like someone dragging a finger along the inside of the wall. Slow and deliberate, starting near the kitchen and stopping directly behind my headboard. I lay still and counted the seconds. I told myself it was mice. I told myself a lot of things that month. In the morning, I checked the walls and found nothing. No holes, no marks, no evidence of anything living inside them. The plaster was smooth and very cold, even in September. I started sleeping with the light on. Not because I was afraid, I told myself, but because the darkness in that apartment had a particular quality I couldn't name. It wasn't just the absence of light. It felt occupied. My therapist, whom I was still seeing over video call twice a month, said that moving to a new city after a divorce was one of the most destabilizing experiences a person could have, and that the mind fills unfamiliar spaces with threat. I wrote that down. I repeated it to myself at 2 in the morning when the dragging sound came again and stopped. As always, precisely behind my head, the mirror showed me something on the 14th day. I want to be accurate here because accuracy is the only thing I have left. I was brushing my teeth, and in the reflection, I saw the bathroom door, which was behind me, standing open by about 6 inches. I had closed it. I always close it, a habit from childhood I never broke. I turned around, and the door was closed. I looked back at the mirror, and the door in the reflection was still open. I stood there for a long time, toothbrush in my hand, foam drying at the corner of my mouth. And I watched the reflected door and the real door disagree with each other. Then the reflection caught up or corrected itself, and both doors were closed. I rinsed my mouth. I went to bed. I did not call anyone because I had no explanation that wouldn't make me sound like a woman who was not handling her life well. I asked the neighbor across the hall about the previous tenant in October. Her name was Mrs. Ferrante, and she was in her 70s, and she opened her door only as far as the chain would allow. When I described him, the man who had left the 3 nails, she looked at me without expression for a moment and then said she didn't remember anyone living there before me. The building manager had told me the apartment hadn't been vacant for more than 2 weeks. Someone had lived there. Someone had driven 3 nails into that wall with intention and spacing. Mrs. Ferrante said she hoped. I was settling in well and closed her door. And I heard her lock it, and then I heard the second lock, and then what I believed was a third. The smell came in November. It was faint, and I couldn't locate it. The way certain smells are not coming from any direction, but simply present in the air. Like the smell has replaced the air itself. It reminded me of something I couldn't identify for 2 days. And then on the 3rd day, I identified it. It was the smell of a room that had been closed for a very long time and then opened. Old stillness. Captured air finally moving. It was strongest near the 3rd nail, the empty one. And I developed the habit of walking past that section of wall without looking at it. The way you learn to navigate around a bruise. I found the notebook in December, behind the radiator, when I was retrieving a pen I had dropped. It was a standard composition notebook, black and white cover, and the pages were dense with handwriting so small I needed my phone's camera to zoom in and read it. Most of it was mundane, lists and reminders, and what seemed to be schedules. The ordinary residue of a life. But the last 12 pages were different. The handwriting changed, became larger and less controlled. And it was the same sentence, repeated with minor variations across all 12 pages. I have copied it here as accurately as I can. It read, "I can hear it learning my patterns." Then, "It has learned my patterns." Then for the final 7 pages, "Only it knows when I am asleep." I should have left. I want to say clearly that I know I should have left. But the lease was through April, and the deposit was 2 months' rent. And I had just started a job I needed, and the human capacity to normalize is profound and, I now understand, dangerous. I told myself the previous tenant had been mentally ill. I told myself the notebook was the artifact of a troubled mind and not a record of anything real. I threw it away, and I went to work, and I came home, and I ate dinner, and I watched television, and I went to bed. And on most nights, the sound came, and on most nights, I counted the seconds until it stopped. And on most nights, it stopped behind my head, and on some nights, it didn't stop at all, but continued. Very softly, past the headboard and toward the window, where it would go quiet in a way that felt less like ending and more like waiting. What changed in January was not the sounds or the mirror or the smell. What changed was that I began to lose time. Small amounts at first. I would sit down to eat at 7 and look up at the clock, and it would be 9:15 and my food would be cold and I would have no memory of the interval. I went to my doctor and she ran tests and found nothing and suggested I was under stress. I was under stress. That was certainly true. But stress does not explain what I found on the morning of the 19th of January. When I woke and went to the kitchen and saw that the chair at the head of my table had been pulled out from the table, and on the seat of the chair was a careful arrangement of every small object I owned. My keys, a coin from my jacket pocket, a button that had come off my sleeve a week earlier and that I had placed on my nightstand, the nail I had never used, which I had left in a kitchen drawer, which was now closed. I called my sister that morning. I told her everything, beginning to end. And when I finished, there was a silence, and she said, in a very careful voice, that she thought I should come and stay with her for a while. I told her I would think about it. I did not leave. I still do not completely understand why I did not leave, except that by that point I had the persistent and entirely irrational feeling that leaving would not have changed anything. That whatever had learned my patterns had learned them completely, and that patterns, once learned, do not require a location to be useful. The last thing I will record is this. On the final night of January, I woke at 3 in the morning with the absolute certainty that I was not alone in the room. Not the vague unease I had grown accustomed to, but a hard and specific certainty. The same certainty you feel when you are in a dark room and another person moves and you feel the air change. I lay still. I kept my eyes open. The room was dark, and I had finally stopped sleeping with the light on because the light made no difference, and I had accepted that. I lay still for a very long time. Then I turned my head toward the third nail, the one on the wall beside my bed that I had never hung anything on. And in the darkness, I could see that something was hanging on it now, and the something had the shape and the stillness of a coat. And I had hung my coat on the first nail since the day I moved in, and the first nail was by the door. And I did not get up to check. In the morning, the nail was empty. My coat was where it always was. I packed a bag, and I called my sister, and I drove for 11 hours without stopping, and I have not gone back. I am writing this in her spare room, which smells like laundry and coffee and the ordinary passage of time. I sleep with the door closed. I have not hung anything on the walls. When I wake in the night and lie still in the unfamiliar dark, I count my breaths instead of seconds. And I tell myself that whatever learned my patterns in that apartment, learned them in that apartment. And that I am in a different place now, with different walls. And that patterns require proximity to be dangerous. I tell myself this, and I almost believe it. Except that last night I woke at 3 and turned my head toward the wall. The same way I always turned it, the gesture already completed before I was fully conscious. The habit already formed, the body already knowing which direction to look. I kept the candles because the power had been out for 3 days, and the generator made a sound I didn't trust anymore. A low mechanical groan that seemed to pause at irregular intervals, as if it were listening. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that became impassable after heavy snow. And the snow that year had come early and stayed mean, packing itself into the tree lines and erasing the distinction between the field and the forest that bordered it to the north. I had rented the place for 6 weeks to finish a manuscript I had been avoiding for 2 years. The owner, a retired schoolteacher named Harlan, who smelled of pipe tobacco and wore the same green vest every time I saw him, had handed me a single key on a plain ring and told me the well pump occasionally required priming, that the wood stove drew better with the damper half closed, and that the nearest town was 40 minutes on clear roads. He said nothing else that seemed significant at the time. The first 2 weeks were exactly what I needed. I wrote in the mornings at the kitchen table, walked the field perimeter in the afternoons before the light died at 4, and read by the wood stove until I was tired enough to sleep without effort. There was a landline that worked intermittently, the single bar of cellular signal that appeared and vanished depending on where I stood in the cabin. I called my wife on Tuesdays and Saturdays from the northeast corner of the bedroom, standing with my back to the window that looked out over the tree line. She asked if I was lonely. I told her I was productive, which was not an answer, but she accepted it anyway. The first thing I noticed that I could not explain was on a Thursday in the 3rd week. I had come in from the afternoon walk and was removing my boots in the mudroom when I became aware that something on the kitchen table had moved. I had left a yellow legal pad next to my coffee mug with the pen lying diagonally across it, the habit of someone who intends to return shortly. And now the pen was parallel to the pad's edge, precisely so. The way you might place a utensil when you have finished eating. I stood in the mudroom doorway for a moment, looking at it. The windows were closed. There was no draft I could identify. I told myself I had placed it that way myself without remembering, which is the first thing you tell yourself, and I moved on. The second thing happened 4 days later at night. I was lying in the bed reading when I heard footsteps on the porch. Not the random percussion of an animal, which I had heard before and recognized. The tentative 4-point rhythm of a deer. The skitter of something smaller. But a 2-point step, deliberate and even, moving from the left side of the porch to the right and stopping. I lay still for a long time with the book open across my chest, not reading. The steps did not resume. After 20 minutes, I got up and looked out the front window and saw nothing on the porch. Nothing in the yard, the snow unbroken and blue-white under a half moon. No tracks that I could see from that angle. I did not open the door that night. In the morning, I went out and walked the porch perimeter and found nothing in the snow leading up to it. No tracks approaching from any direction, which should have been reassuring, and was not. I told myself the porch boards had contracted in the cold. I knew how settling would sound it, and this had not sounded like that. But I filed the explanation anyway and went inside, and made coffee and wrote 4 pages that were among the better ones I had produced in months. The mind compensates. It wants to work, and it will construct whatever shelter it needs. The third thing I cannot explain as easily. I had developed the habit of leaving the bathroom light on at night. Not for fear of the dark as a concept, but because the path from the bedroom to the kitchen for water involved a low doorframe I had struck twice. On the night of the 22nd day, I woke at some hour I didn't immediately register and became aware that the bathroom light was off. I lay there, recalculating. I remembered turning it on. I was certain I had turned it on because I had stood in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth, and looked at my own face in the light and noted that I looked tired in a way that sleep was not resolving. The bulb, I told myself. I got up to replace it, and when I stepped into the bathroom and reached for the switch, the light came on immediately and the bulb was fine. The switch had been turned off. It is a toggle switch, the old kind, and it does not turn itself. I stood in the bathroom for a long time. Then I went back to bed and lay there until it was light enough outside to justify getting up. I did not call my wife on Saturday because I did not know how to describe what I was feeling, which was not exactly fear, but a close relative of it. Something more like the sustained attention of a person who has heard a sound in a building they believed was empty. I began to pay attention to the physical record of the cabin in a different way. I had not been especially meticulous before, but now I was. I arranged objects with intention and checked them. I photographed the table before I left for walks with my phone. Nothing moved again that I could detect. The footstep sound did not recur. The lights stayed as I left them. For several days, I began to believe I had been mistaken about all of it, a rational and tempting conclusion, and I started sleeping better. Then I found the cellar. I had not known there was a cellar. The cabin had no obvious access to one from the interior, and Harlan had not mentioned it, and I had not thought to ask. I found it because on the morning of the 29th day, was moving a braided rug in the sitting room to get at a draft I could feel through the floorboards, and beneath the rug was a hatch with an iron ring set flush into the wood. It was not locked. The cellar below was low and dirt-floored and smelled of cold earth and something else. Organic and faintly sweet, the way a space smells when it has held something biological for a long time. I went down with a flashlight. The cellar was perhaps 12 feet by 12 feet, supported by rough timber, and it held a rusted metal shelving unit with old paint cans and mason jars. A child's wooden chair with one leg shorter than the others that had been shimmied with a folded piece of cardboard, and against the far wall, a mattress. It was a twin mattress, bare, no sheets, and it was not old and rotted the way the rest of the cellar's contents were. It was relatively recent, visibly used in the compressed and slightly discolored way of a mattress that has been slept on with regularity. Beside it, placed with that same precise quality I had noticed in the relocated pen, was a single glass of water, clear, no sediment, recently filled, still cool when I touched it with the back of my hand. I left the cellar. I pulled the hatch closed and put the rug back, and I packed my bag with the efficiency of someone who has made a decision they are not going to revisit. I packed the manuscript pages, the charger, the 2 books I cared most about, and I left everything else. I drove the 40 minutes to town in conditions that had deteriorated since the last time I had made that drive. The road slick and the light already going at 3 in the afternoon, and I did not stop until I reached the gas station at the edge of town where there were other cars and lit windows. I called my wife from the parking lot. She answered immediately. I told her I was coming home. She asked if I was all right. I told her I was not hurt. She understood the distinction. I have not called Harlan. I have considered what I would say, and I have not yet found an arrangement of words I trust myself to deliver calmly. I have thought about the water glass, specifically about its temperature. About the fact that it was cool but not cold the way water becomes when it has sat in a cold space for a long time. And I have concluded that it had been placed there recently, within hours of my finding it, during a period when I was certain I had been alone. I have thought about the length of my stay, 29 days, and I have thought about the way the cabin sat at the end of that road and how the snowpack erased approaches from any direction. I have thought about the footsteps stopping, not leaving, stopping. I am home now. I sleep with the lights on for reasons I have stopped apologizing for. I've not been back to the manuscript. Every morning, I sit down at my own kitchen table, in my own house, with my wife's sounds in adjacent rooms, And I place my pen precisely parallel to the edge of the page. And I think about what it means to know that you are not alone in a place. And I find that I cannot write about anything else. I moved into the apartment on a Tuesday in November, the kind of Tuesday that smells like wet concrete and dead leaves. The building was old pre-war, the listing said, as if that were a selling point, and the elevator had been out of service since August, according to the handwritten note taped to its doors. I carried my boxers up 4 flights of stairs, 3 trips, and by the time I dropped the last one on the kitchen floor, my arms were shaking, and the hallway light on my floor had begun to flicker. I told myself it was the wiring. Old buildings have old wiring. That is what I told myself. The apartment was a 1-bedroom with high ceilings and original hardwood floors that creaked in places even when I stood completely still. I assumed settling. I assumed the cold. My downstairs neighbor, a retired woman named Mrs. Farber, introduced herself the next morning by knocking with the handle of an umbrella and offering me a plate of something wrapped in foil. She had pale eyes and the careful posture of someone who had learned, late in life, to take up less space. She told me the previous tenant had been a young man named Daniel who had lived there for almost 3 years. I asked why he left. She looked at the foil on the plate instead of at me and said he had not exactly left. And then she smiled in a way that closed the subject entirely and went back downstairs. I did not sleep well the first week. This was not unusual for me in a new place, and I attributed the insomnia to the sounds of the building, the pipes, the radiator that knocked twice every hour with the regularity of a metronome, the occasional footsteps from the apartment above mine, which was, according to the super, vacant and had been vacant for over a year. I lay in the dark and listened to those footsteps and decided they were the building contracting in the cold. I am a practical person. I work in data analysis. I do not believe in things I cannot measure. By the second week, I had arranged the furniture, unpacked every box, and established a routine. I woke at 6:30, made coffee, worked from home until 5, cooked something simple, read until 10, slept. The footsteps continued above me every night between 2 and 3 in the morning. I went upstairs once with a flashlight and knocked on the door of the apartment directly overhead. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I went back to bed and lay there listening, and eventually the sound stopped and I slept. The smell came first. It arrived on a Wednesday, faint and low, something organic and wrong underneath the baseline smell of old wood and dust. I checked the kitchen, checked under the sink, checked the bathroom, nothing. I bought a candle and burned it for 2 days, and the smell faded and I forgot about it. Then the mirror in the bathroom began to fog at the edges even when I had not showered. I noticed it one morning while brushing my teeth, a soft opacity creeping inward from the frame, as though the glass were breathing. I wiped it with my hand. It came back the next morning. I assumed moisture. I assumed the ventilation. I bought a small fan and pointed it at the mirror, and the fogging stopped for 4 days and then returned worse than before. And this time, when I wiped it with my palm, I saw that beneath my hand, in the cleared section of glass, there was a shape in the fog behind me. Not a face. Not exactly. More the suggestion of a face, the way a face occupies space, a vertical symmetry in the mist that had no business being there. I turned around. The bathroom was empty. I turned back to the mirror and wiped the entire surface, clean, and stood there for a long time watching it, and it did not fog again that morning, and I went to work and did not think about it because thinking about it was not productive. And I am a productive person. I called Mrs. Farber that evening and asked her again about Daniel. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said he had been a quiet young man. Considerate? never loud, never any trouble, and that toward the end he had begun sliding notes under her door. I asked what the notes said. She said she had thrown them away. I asked if she remembered what was in them. She said they were not the kind of thing a person holds on to. I asked if he was okay, and she said that was a complicated question, and she was too old for complicated questions, and she hung up. I found the first note on a Thursday. It was folded under the kitchen sink behind the pipe, small and yellowed, and folded 3 times with the precision of someone who needed their hands to be doing something deliberate. The handwriting was cramped and pressed hard into the paper. The kind of writing that comes from pressing because you are not sure you will be able to finish. It said, "It uses the mirrors. Do not look directly. Do not let it know you can see it." I held the note for a long time. Then I put it in the kitchen drawer and made dinner and watched something on my laptop and went to bed. I found 6 more notes over the following 10 days. Under the bathroom vanity, behind the radiator, tucked into the gap between the window frame and the wall in the bedroom. Each one was the same cramped handwriting, each one dated. The dates spanning a period of about 4 months, ending 8 months before I moved in. They were not hysterical. That was what struck me most. They were methodical, almost clinical. As if Daniel had been documenting something and had understood that his documentation needed to be precise to be believed. The notes described a progression. First, the smell. Then the mirror. Then the footsteps. Then the voice, which he described as not a voice exactly, but an awareness of being spoken to. A pressure behind the ears, like the sensation of descent in an airplane, language without sound. And then, in the last note, which I found between the mattress and the box spring, a single sentence, I looked directly at it, and now it knows. I am here, and there is no version of this that ends well for me, so I am writing this for whoever comes next, and I am sorry I cannot do more than this. I sat on the edge of the bed with that note in my hands for a long time. I am a practical person. I work in data analysis. I sat there and I was practical and I analyzed the data, and the data was this. A young man had lived in this apartment and had written these notes and was no longer here, and Mrs. Farber had said he had not exactly left, and there were footsteps every night in the empty apartment above me, and the mirror fogged from the outside in, and something smelled wrong beneath the smell of wood and dust. That was the data. I sat with it. I decided to leave. I called the super and told him I would be breaking the lease, and he told me there would be a penalty, and I said that was fine. I packed a bag that night, just a bag, clothes and my laptop and my documents. And I set it by the door, and I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth before bed because I was going to sleep. One more night and leave in the morning. Because I am practical, and practical people do not flee. Apartments at 11 o'clock at night over notes written by a stranger. I should not have gone to the bathroom. I know that now. I stood at the sink, and I brushed my teeth, and I looked at the mirror, and it was clear. Perfectly clear, not fogged at all. And I could see myself and the bathroom behind me, and the shower curtain, and the door, and everything exactly as it should be. And I was almost relieved, and then I saw that my reflection's eyes were not moving when my eyes moved. They were fixed. They were fixed on something behind me and slightly to the left, and I felt the pressure behind my ears that Daniel had described. Not painful, almost gentle. The gentleness of something that has been waiting and is no longer in a hurry. And I understood then that I had already looked directly at it. That I had been looking at it every morning for 2 weeks in the fogged edges of the mirror. That the clearing of the fog had not been absence, but invitation. That Daniel's note had been a warning about the precise thing I had already done without knowing I was doing it. And the pressure behind my ears resolved slowly into something that was almost words. Patient and close and very interested in me. And my reflection's eyes held perfectly still, and I stood there at the sink with the toothbrush in my hand and the water running. And I did not move for a very long time. I am writing this now. I am sitting at the kitchen table, and it is 4 in the morning, and the bag is still by the door. The mirror in the bathroom is fogged completely, edge to edge, no clearing at all, and I have not gone back in there. The footsteps upstairs stopped an hour ago. The smell is stronger tonight than it has ever been. I am writing this because Daniel wrote it for me, and I did not understand it in time, and whoever comes next deserves more than I had. The notes are in the kitchen drawer. Read them in order. Do not use the bathroom mirror. Do not listen for the footsteps, because listening means you are already in the conversation. I am going to leave now. I am going to pick up the bag by the door and walk down 4 flights of stairs and not look at anything reflective on the way out. I am a practical person. I am going to be fine. I am writing this down because writing it down makes it real, and real things can be survived, and I need very much to believe that right now.